What if everything we've been taught about leadership is backwards? Picture this: kings draped in gold, commanding armies, shaping empires, yet crumbling under the weight of their own power. Now shift your gaze to a monk in silent solitude, seated on a stone floor with nothing but his thoughts. Who do you think truly understood the essence of leadership? The answer might surprise you. For centuries, we've equated leadership with authority, with control, with the ability to bend the world to one's will. But the Stoics, thinkers like Marcus Aurelius, who ruled Rome yet wrote privately about the fragility of power, whispered a different truth. Real leadership isn't about ruling others. It's about ruling yourself. Consider the monks who chose isolation over palaces, silence over proclamations. While kings were distracted by the chaos of their courts, these monks were mastering something far more profound: the art of presence. They practiced detachment, not from responsibility, but from the illusions of control. They cultivated resilience, not through force, but through stillness. And in doing so, they uncovered a paradox: the less you seek to dominate the world, the more you understand how to move it. This isn't just ancient wisdom. It's a mirror held up to our modern obsession with busyness, with titles, with the relentless pursuit of more. What if the most powerful leaders aren't the ones shouting orders, but the ones who have learned to listen to their own minds, to the moment, to the quiet truths that chaos drowns out? This is the heart of Stoicism, and it's why the monks in their cells saw further than kings on their thrones. They knew that leadership begins inward. A ruler who can't master his own fears, his own desires, his own reactions will inevitably become a slave to them, no matter how many bow before him. The monks, though, had nothing to prove and no one to impress. Their authority came from something unshakable: a mind trained in clarity, a spirit unbroken by external storms. In this video, we'll explore the Stoic principles these monks lived by: detachment as strength, resilience as choice, presence as power, and how they offer a blueprint for leadership that's not just effective, but timeless. Because the real question isn't who gets to lead, it's what kind of leader are you when no one is watching. History shows us kings who commanded nations yet couldn't command their own minds. Take Nero, who burned Rome in a fit of paranoia, or Louis XVI, whose indecision during crisis sealed his fate. Their crowns gave them authority over armies, but not over their own fears or impulses. Power, when untethered from self-mastery, becomes a trap, a truth Seneca captured when he wrote, "No man was ever wise by chance." The very things that made kings powerful: wealth, armies, flattery, became the distractions that clouded their judgment. Surrounded by chaos, they reacted rather than reflected, their emotions swinging like pendulums with every threat or compliment. Now, step into the silence of a monk's cell. No servants, no gold, no audience, just the raw discipline of thought. Here, authority wasn't taken from others, it was built within. While kings chased validation through conquest, monks practiced something radical: indifference to external praise or blame. They trained their minds like muscles, turning adversity into fuel for resilience. A storm might rage outside, but inside, unshakable focus. This is where Stoicism flips the script on power. True strength isn't in controlling others, it's in mastering the one thing you actually control: your response. The irony is profound. Kings had every resource imaginable, yet their reigns were often cut short by rebellion or folly. Monks, with nothing but their will, cultivated a different kind of influence, one that outlasted dynasties. Because when you're no longer hostage to emotions, no longer desperate for approval, every decision comes from clarity, not fear. That's the Stoic secret. Leadership begins the moment you stop demanding the world bend to you and start refining how you meet the world. The monks didn't need a throne to change lives. Their power came from a mind so disciplined, so attuned to reason, that even in solitude, their presence rippled outward. This isn't just philosophy, it's practical rebellion against the noise of modern leadership. How many CEOs or politicians today resemble those ancient kings, chasing short-term wins, addicted to urgency, their judgment warped by the very systems meant to empower them? Meanwhile, the monk's approach, deliberate, intentional, rooted in self-awareness, offers a path through the chaos. The next time you face a crossroads, ask yourself, are you reacting like a king or responding like a monk? The difference defines not just your choices but your legacy. Solitude wasn't just an absence of noise for these monks, it was a mirror. In the quiet of their cells, with no distractions to blame and no crowds to perform for, they faced the one thing most leaders spend their lives avoiding: themselves. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher born a slave, put it bluntly, "First learn the meaning of what you say and then speak." That's the power of isolation. It strips away the excuses, the roles, the masks, and leaves you with raw truth. Kings held court to hear the echoes of their own voices, but monks sat alone to hear the whispers of their own minds. And in that silence, they discovered something revolutionary. Self-awareness isn't just a trait of good leadership, it's the foundation. Think of solitude as a forge. Without the constant hammering of opinions, agendas, and emergencies, the mind has space to refine its own metal. Modern leaders who grasp this, like executives who take quarterly retreats or founders who practice silent meditation, aren't indulging in luxury. They're sharpening their most vital tool, discernment. Bill Gates famously took, think, weeks, disappearing into a cabin with stacks of books and no interruptions. The result: breakthrough ideas that shaped Microsoft's future. The parallel to the monks is uncanny. Both understood that clarity doesn't emerge from endless meetings or frantic action. It emerges from the courage to sit with your own thoughts long enough to see them clearly. Here's the challenge solitude presents. It reveals the gaps between what we say we value and how we actually live. A king might proclaim justice but act out of spite. A CEO might preach innovation but cling to outdated habits. Solitude exposes these contradictions, not to shame but to spark change. Epictetus called this the discipline of assent, the practice of pausing between stimulus and response to ask, is this true? Is this necessary? That split second of introspection is where real leadership is born. Because when you're alone, there's no one to perform for, no ladder to climb, no image to uphold. There's just you and the unvarnished reality of your choices. So how might this apply to you? Start small. Carve out 10 minutes of true solitude, no phone, no distractions, and observe what arises. Do your thoughts race toward to-do lists, or do they settle into deeper questions? Are you comfortable with silence, or does it feel like a void you rush to fill? This isn't about becoming a hermit. It's about reclaiming the space to hear your own wisdom. Because the monks didn't retreat from the world to escape it. They retreated to understand it, and in that understanding, they found a leadership more potent than any crown could offer: the ability to lead from a place of unshakable self-knowledge. Detachment from outcomes sounds simple until you realize how deeply we're wired to crave validation. Kings built monuments to cement their legacies, waged wars to prove their strength, and altered laws to win popular favor. Their decisions, though dressed in grandeur, were often reactions to threats, to flattery, to the fear of being forgotten. But monks, they sat with a different question: what if the outcome doesn't matter? Not in a nihilistic sense, but in the Stoic understanding that clinging to results you can't control is a recipe for suffering. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who ruled Rome with one hand and wrote private meditations with the other, put it plainly: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Think of it like this: a king orders a bridge built and measures his success by its completion. If storms delay it or rebels burn it, he takes it as a personal failure. The monk, though, measures success differently by the integrity of his effort. Did he act with wisdom, with courage, with fairness? If so, the bridge's fate is irrelevant. This shift from outcome-focused to principle-driven changes everything. One leader is tossed by every storm of praise or blame. The other stands firm, not because he's indifferent, but because his worth isn't tied to external validation. History's most tragic rulers reveal the cost of this attachment. Henry VIII reshaped England's religion for a male heir. Napoleon marched into Russia for glory, and countless CEOs chase quarterly profits at the expense of long-term vision. Their common thread, a desperate need to control the uncontrollable. Meanwhile, the monks free from the hunger for legacy could act from a deeper compass. When your decisions aren't fueled by fear of failure or lust for reward, you see with startling clarity. Here's the modern parallel. How often do you postpone a creative project because you're afraid it won't succeed? Or swallow your truth to avoid conflict? These are kingly reflexes, letting hypothetical outcomes dictate real choices. The monk's approach flips the script. Focus on the work, not the applause. Speak with honesty, not calculation. The irony: detachment often leads to better results, precisely because you're no longer straining to force them. Like an archer who concentrates on form, not the bullseye, your aim improves when you stop obsessing over the target. So try this. Next time you face a decision, ask not, "What will people think?" but "What's the right thing to do?" Then act fully, fiercely, and let the outcome be what it will be. That's the quiet power of detachment, not apathy, but freedom. The kind of freedom that lets you lead not from neediness, but from unwavering principle. And that changes not just your decisions, but the world around you. Desire is a fire. It can warm you or consume you. Kings draped in silk, feasting on delicacies while their subjects starved, learned this too late. Their cravings for more land, more gold, more power became the very chains that dragged them down. Look at King Midas, who wished for everything he touched to turn to gold, only to realize too late that even his food and his daughter became lifeless metal. His story isn't just myth, it's a warning. Unchecked desire distorts judgment, turning abundance into a prison. The Stoics saw this clearly. Epictetus, born into slavery, knew desire wasn't the problem. It was the refusal to question what we truly needed. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, he wrote, but in having few wants. Now picture a monk's morning, a bowl of plain porridge, a sip of water, the same robe worn for years. To the outside world, it looks like deprivation, but to the monk, it's something radical: freedom. By mastering desire, he isn't denying himself joy, he's reclaiming it. Luxury, after all, is relative. A king accustomed to feasts grows bored until the next spectacle. The monk, though, finds richness in the taste of a single raisin, the warmth of sunlight on stone. The Stoics called this temperance, not the rejection of pleasure, but the wisdom to enjoy it without being enslaved by it. History's fallen kings reveal the cost of ignoring this lesson. Take Emperor Caligula, who emptied Rome's treasury on absurd whims, building a floating palace just to prove he could, declaring war on the sea itself. His unchecked appetites turned him into a tyrant, then a corpse. Contrast that with the monk Benedict of Nursia, who founded Western monasticism on a rule of simplicity. His followers thrived not because they had nothing, but because they wanted nothing. Their discipline of desire became their strength, allowing them to outlast empires. Here's the challenge for us today. Desire isn't inherently evil. It's the compass we refuse to calibrate, that craving for a promotion, for validation, for the next purchase. What if it's not about the thing itself, but the hollow space we're trying to fill? The Stoics offered a practice: pause before you pursue. Ask, is this within my control? Will it make me more virtuous or just more dependent? Try this with one desire right now. Maybe it's the impulse to scroll mindlessly, or the resentment when someone gets praise you wanted. Observe it without judgment, then ask, what would the monk do? Not with guilt, but curiosity, because the goal isn't to erase desire, it's to align it with something deeper than fleeting satisfaction. The irony is profound. Kings had the world, yet starved for more. Monks had nothing, yet lacked nothing. Their secret: they didn't suppress desire, they redirected it toward mastery, toward peace, toward the quiet joy of enough. That's the shift available to anyone, not by abandoning wants, but by choosing which ones are worthy of you. The greatest leaders aren't the ones who shout the loudest, they're the ones who listen closest. While kings held court, drowning in the noise of advisors, petitions, and looming rebellions, monks sat in stillness, training their minds to do something extraordinary, to be fully here. Not lost in yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's anxieties, but anchored in the now. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who knew the whip of slavery before the clarity of wisdom, put it simply: don't let the future disturb you. You will meet it with the same weapons of reason and action you use today. That's the art of presence, not passive but fiercely attentive, a skill kings rarely mastered because they were too busy putting out fires they'd often ignited themselves. Take Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who journaled by candlelight, reminding himself, confine yourself to the present. Even as he governed an empire, he carved out moments of stillness to sharpen his focus. Contrast that with King Richard III, who famously lost a kingdom over a horse, not because the horse mattered, but because his impulsive reaction to losing it unraveled his judgment in battle. The difference: one leader cultivated presence, the other was enslaved by reaction. Monks understood this instinctively. Without the distractions of court intrigue or the burden of constant performance, they honed their attention like a blade. A wandering mind, after all, is a vulnerable one, to anger, to fear, to the thousand petty distractions that cloud decision-making. Modern science backs this ancient wisdom. Studies on mindfulness show what monks knew centuries ago. The brain trained in presence has greater emotional regulation, sharper problem-solving, even improved memory. Think of a CEO in a high-stakes meeting, truly listening instead of mentally rehearsing their next rebuttal, or a parent fully engaged with their child, not half glancing at a screen. Presence isn't mystical, it's practical. It's the space between stimulus and response where choice lives. Kings lost wars in that space, monks found clarity. So here's a challenge for the next hour. Notice how often your mind time travels. Are you replaying an awkward conversation from yesterday, fretting over a deadline next week? That mental clutter isn't just distracting, it's costly. Every moment spent elsewhere is a moment you're absent from your own life. The monks didn't avoid planning or reflection. They simply refused to let it hijack their now. Try this next time you're in a conversation. Pause. Listen not to reply, but to understand. Taste your food instead of scrolling past it. Walk without mentally drafting your to-do list. These small acts of presence are how you reclaim sovereignty over your attention, the very currency of leadership. Because the future is built not in grand proclamations, but in the quality of your moments. And the best leaders, like those monks in their cells, know that the present isn't where you wait for greatness, it's where you create it. Resilience wasn't just a trait for the monks, it was a practice, honed daily like the edge of a blade. While kings built walls to keep adversity out, monks welcomed it in, not as an enemy but as a teacher. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor who ruled Rome through plague and war, scribbled in his private journal, "The obstacle is the way." 4 words that invert everything we assume about hardship. For kings, obstacles were threats to their power, cracks in their armor, but for the monks, each challenge was a chisel, shaping them into something unbreakable. Consider the difference in their responses. When famine struck, a king might hoard grain, fearing unrest. A monk, though, would fast voluntarily, not to punish himself, but to discover what lay beyond hunger's grip. One saw scarcity as a problem to suppress, the other as a lesson to absorb. History's most fragile rulers, like Tsar Nicholas II, whose inability to adapt to change doomed his dynasty, show what happens when resistance to adversity becomes rigidity. Meanwhile, monks like Thomas Merton, who turned the isolation of a Kentucky monastery into a wellspring of spiritual writings, proved that hardship, when met with curiosity, becomes fuel. Modern leaders who grasp this thrive where others falter. Take James Stockdale, the Navy pilot shot down over Vietnam. For 7 years in a prisoner of war camp, he survived torture and solitary confinement by applying Stoic principles. He later wrote that the prisoners who didn't make it were the optimists who kept saying, "We'll be home by Christmas." Stockdale, though, faced the brutal reality head-on, not with despair, but with clear-eyed resolve. His adversity didn't break him, it revealed him. That's the monk's mindset, not, "Why is this happening to me?" but, "What is this revealing in me?" Here's where it gets personal. Think of a challenge you're facing right now, a setback at work, a strained relationship, maybe even a failure that stings. Now ask, is this a wall blocking your path, or a doorway to a strength you didn't know you had? The Stoics would say it's both. The wall is real, but the choice to climb it, tunnel under it, or simply sit with it until you understand its purpose, that's where your power lies. Kings crumbled because they demanded the world conform to their plans. Monks endured because they conformed their minds to the world as it was. So try this. Next time you hit an obstacle, pause. Instead of reacting, interrogate it. What skill could this teach you? What patience could it demand? What false assumption might it shatter? Resilience isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about learning to dance in the rain. And that's a lesson no throne can provide, only the willingness to sit quietly in your own cell, listening for the whisper of growth in the heart of the struggle. Humility is the quiet strength kings often mocked and monks mastered. While rulers adorned themselves with titles and monuments, monks bowed their heads, not in weakness, but in the profound understanding that true wisdom begins with acknowledging how little you know. Seneca, the Stoic tutor to Emperor Nero, saw this divide clearly. No tree becomes rooted and sturdy unless a strong wind blows against it. Kings, insulated by sycophants, rarely felt that wind. Their hubris became their blind spot, like King Xerxes, who ordered the sea whipped for disobeying him, only to watch his navy drown in storms of his own making. Monks, though, embraced humility as their sharpest tool. In their cells, with no audience to impress, they confronted their limitations daily. A missed meditation, a flash of irritation, a moment of pride. These weren't failures to hide, but lessons to study. This radical honesty did something extraordinary. It turned weakness into growth. Imagine a leader today who admits mistakes openly, who seeks criticism instead of silencing it. That's not vulnerability, it's strategic clarity. Teams trust leaders who don't posture because humility signals safety. It says, we're here to solve problems, not protect egos. History's most disastrous rulers illustrate the cost of ignoring this. Take Napoleon, who dismissed warnings about invading Russia, calling them the chatter of cowards. His army froze in retreat, losing 500,000 men to his unchecked arrogance. Contrast that with George Washington, who, despite leading a revolution, repeatedly deferred to Congress, even when power tempted him. His restraint built a nation. Napoleon's pride destroyed an empire. The monks would nod knowingly. Their discipline of humility wasn't self-effacement, it was the ultimate power move. By refusing to inflate their own importance, they became immune to the traps of flattery and fear. So where does this land for you? Think of a recent disagreement. Did you listen to understand or to rebut? When feedback stung, did you deflect or dissect it? Humility isn't about shrinking, it's about creating space for reality to shape you. Try this for one day. Replace "I know" with "tell me more." Notice how conversations shift when you approach them as a student, not a sovereign, because the monks didn't kneel to others, they knelt to truth. And that's the humility that doesn't diminish leaders, but elevates them beyond the need for crowns. The greatest illusion of leadership is the belief that control equals power. Kings sat on thrones convinced their decrees shaped destinies, only to watch rebellions erupt and plagues ravage despite their commands. Their tragedy wasn't lack of authority, it was misunderstanding where authority truly lies. Epictetus, the Stoic who knew the sting of slavery before the solace of philosophy, drew a line in the sand. Some things are within our control, others are not. On one side, our judgments, actions, desires. On the other, everything else: the weather, the past, other people's opinions. Kings spent lifetimes wrestling the second list, monks mastered the first. Consider the modern CEO who obsesses over quarterly metrics, employee productivity, even office thermostat settings, mistaking busyness for control. Contrast that with leaders like Satya Nadella at Microsoft, who transformed the company's culture by focusing not on dictating innovation, but on creating conditions where it could flourish. The difference: one clenches fists around sand, watching it slip through, the other tends the soil and lets the garden grow. This is the Stoic dichotomy in action. The monk in his cell didn't waste energy cursing the cold. He chose how to meet it, with stillness, with breath, with the decision not to resent what he couldn't change. History's most frantic rulers reveal the cost of this illusion. King Canute famously ordered tides to halt, not because he believed he could, but to prove to his flatterers the limits of his power. Yet centuries later, leaders still play Canute, yelling at markets, demanding loyalty from fickle crowds, burning out teams in pursuit of impossible certainty. Meanwhile, the monks practiced a radical alternative: sovereignty over their inner world. When a storm raged outside, they didn't pray for it to cease. They trained their minds not to be stormed. So where does this leave you? Take a sheet of paper right now, literally or mentally, and draw Epictetus' line. On one side, list what you genuinely control: your effort, your honesty, your willingness to learn. On the other, what you don't: traffic, deadlines, whether others like you. The magic happens in the gap between. That's where the monks thrived, not by ignoring external chaos, but by refining their response to it. The executive who frets over stock prices is as shackled as the king who feared rebellions. The leader who focuses on their own clarity, preparation, and values. That's the monk's legacy in a modern suit. Here's the paradox: the less you try to control, the more influence you gain. Because when you stop forcing outcomes, you start seeing opportunities. When you release the need to micromanage, you create space for others to rise. This isn't passivity, it's precision. Like a sculptor who doesn't fight the marble but works with its grain, the truest leaders understand that control was never about domination. It's about discernment, and that's a throne anyone can claim, no crown required. Silence was the monk's secret weapon, a deliberate choice, not an absence. While kings filled their courts with proclamations and decrees, monks sat in stillness, understanding that wisdom isn't found in the volume of one's voice, but in the depth of one's listening. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who ruled an empire yet journaled in quiet reflection, wrote, "You have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that proportion." It wasn't just advice, it was a revolution. Kings shouted to be heard, monks listened to understand, and in that space between words they found something rare: truth. Consider the modern leader who dominates meetings, mistaking airtime for authority. Contrast that with figures like Warren Buffett, known for his long pauses before speaking, or Jacinda Ardern, whose measured responses in crisis carried more weight than any grandstanding. Their power didn't come from filling silence, it came from respecting it, because silence isn't empty, it's fertile ground. It's where intuition grows, where patience sharpens, where the noise of ego fades enough to hear what actually matters. The monks knew this. While kings scrambled to control narratives, monks cultivated the discipline of holding their tongues, not out of timidity, but strategy. Here's the paradox. In a world addicted to hot takes and knee-jerk reactions, silence becomes a superpower. Think of the negotiator who lets a tense pause stretch until the other side reveals their hand, or the parent who waits out a child's outburst instead of escalating. These aren't passive acts, they're tactical. The Stoics called it the discipline of assent, the practice of pausing before reacting. Every unchecked word is a potential leak of power, every moment of silence a chance to reclaim it. So try this experiment for 1 day. Speak only when necessary, not as a vow of muteness, but as a filter for intention. Notice how often you talk out of habit, to fill space, to assert status, to soothe discomfort. Then notice what happens when you stop. Conversations deepen, observations sharpen. You start to hear the unsaid, the hesitation in a colleague's voice, the quiet plea beneath a loved one's complaint. This isn't about becoming invisible, it's about becoming present, because the loudest leaders aren't the ones who command rooms, they're the ones who create space for others to step into their own strength. The monks didn't retreat into silence to escape the world. They did it to meet the world with clarity, and that's the invitation, to let silence refine your words until they carry the weight of your full attention. Because when you stop speaking just to be heard, people start listening for what you actually mean. Leadership doesn't require a crown or a title. It thrives in the quiet spaces between commands, in the unspoken influence of a life well lived. Monks proved this daily. While kings demanded obedience through decrees and threats, monks led through something far more compelling: the weight of their example. They didn't need to shout their virtues, their actions spoke louder than any edict. A monk rising before dawn to meditate in the cold wasn't just practicing discipline, he was silently teaching it. A monk sharing his last crust of bread wasn't just offering charity, he was embodying it. This was leadership stripped bare of pretense, where influence flowed not from authority, but from integrity. Seneca, the Stoic who served as advisor to an emperor, saw this clearly. A good person shines a light that guides others without a word. History's most effective leaders often ruled without thrones. Think of Harriet Tubman, who led hundreds to freedom not with a title, but with courage etched into every step of the Underground Railroad. Or Fred Rogers, who shaped generations of children not through authority, but through relentless kindness. Their power came from alignment, their lives were their philosophies in motion. Contrast that with kings like Henry VIII, whose chaotic reign was a masterclass in how titles crumble when character fails. His marriages dissolved, his alliances shattered, his legacy stained, all because leadership built on fear and force is a house on sand. The Stoics knew this truth: real leadership is service. Not servitude, but the choice to elevate others by your own conduct. A monk sweeping the monastery floor with the same care as praying wasn't just cleaning. He was demonstrating that no task is beneath dignity. A king, though, he'd delegate that labor while fretting over who bowed deepest. The difference is stark. One leads by lifting, the other by leaning on. So here's a question to carry with you. Who in your life has influenced you without holding a formal title? Maybe it was a teacher who stayed late to listen, a co-worker whose calm under pressure became your benchmark, or a grandparent whose quiet resilience shaped your definition of strength. These are the modern monks, people who lead not by position but by presence. Their authority comes from something no title can confer: the respect they inspire, not the fear they impose. This isn't just philosophy, it's a challenge. The next time you're tempted to rely on your role or rank to make an impact, pause. Ask instead, how can I lead like the monk? Not from above, but alongside. Not with commands, but with character. Because the world doesn't need more figureheads, it needs more people willing to live their truths so vividly that others can't help but find their own. Expectations cling to power like chains, heavy, invisible, and often self-forged. Kings didn't just wear crowns, they carried the crushing weight of their subjects' demands, their noble schemes, the endless chorus of "you must." A ruler was never free to simply be. He was a symbol, a target, a projection of others' hopes and fears. Epictetus, the Stoic who knew the tyranny of external pressures firsthand, offered a razor-sharp antidote. If you wish to improve, be content to appear clueless or foolish. For a king, those words were treason. To a monk, they were liberation. Consider the paradox: a monarch surrounded by servants yet enslaved by expectation, while a solitary monk, owning nothing, possessed something priceless: the right to define his own worth. History's most tragic rulers, like Richard II, who bankrupted England to fund lavish tournaments and win fleeting admiration, show what happens when leadership becomes performance. Every decision was a calculation. Will this make me look strong? Will they still fear me? The monks, though, answered to a different compass. Their audience wasn't fickle crowds, but their own principles. A king's misstep meant rebellion. A monk's failure was just feedback, a chance to refine his character without the distortion of applause or hisses. Modern leaders face the same trap in subtler forms. The CEO chasing quarterly targets at the cost of long-term vision, the artist tailoring work to algorithm-friendly trends, even the parent molding a child to fit societal ideals. All are kings in gilded cages. The Stoic alternative: define your own metrics. A monk didn't meditate to impress the abbot. He did it because clarity was its own reward. That's the shift. When your actions flow from internal conviction, not external pressure, you stop leading for an audience and start leading for impact. Here's the practice Epictetus would prescribe. Choose one expectation you've been carrying, not because it serves you, but because you fear disappointing others. Maybe it's the relentless hustle to meet arbitrary standards, or the guilt of saying no to demands that drain you. Now imagine dropping it just for a day. Not with defiance, but with the quiet certainty of the monk who knows his worth isn't traded in the marketplace of opinions. The sky won't fall. In fact, you might hear something you've been missing: your own voice, steady beneath the noise. Because that's the secret the monks guarded in their cells. Freedom isn't the absence of responsibility, but the courage to choose which responsibilities are truly yours. Kings collapsed under the weight of crowns they never questioned. Monks stood tall not because their burdens were lighter, but because they carried only what mattered. Time was the one currency even kings couldn't hoard, yet how they squandered it. Banquets that lasted weeks, hunts that sprawled across seasons, court intrigues that burned years like kindling. Seneca, the Stoic who watched Emperor Nero fritter away Rome's wealth and his own soul, wrote a scathing indictment: life is long if you know how to use it. The tragedy wasn't that kings died young, it was that they lived so little, mistaking motion for meaning. Meanwhile, in their sparse cells, monks treated each hour like a sacrament. Dawn wasn't just a time to wake, it was an invitation to presence. The bell for prayer wasn't an interruption, it was a reckoning. What will you do with this moment that won't come again? Consider the modern parallel. How often do we wear busyness as a badge of honor, rushing between tasks without ever arriving fully in any of them? A king might have called it holding court. Today we call it back-to-back meetings. The monk's approach was different. His schedule was rigid, not to enslave him, but to free him from the tyranny of later. Meditation at first light. Study at mid-morning, labor in the afternoon. Each block had purpose, and purpose protected time from becoming trivial. Contrast that with Louis XVI, who famously wrote nothing in his diary on the day the Bastille fell, not because nothing happened, but because his hours had been consumed by a hunting excursion while revolution brewed. Here's the Stoic insight we've forgotten. Time isn't just passing, it's being exchanged. Every minute spent complaining is a minute stolen from creating. Every hour lost to distraction is an hour you'll bargain for on your deathbed. Seneca put it brutally: you live as if you were destined to live forever. The monks, though, lived like their next breath might be their last. That's why they wasted nothing, not a scrap of parchment, not a drop of ink, and certainly not a heartbeat. Their discipline wasn't about deprivation, it was about devotion to what mattered. So here's the challenge. For the next 24 hours, track your time like a monk tracking psalms. Not with apps or guilt, but with honest curiosity. How many minutes slip into the void of scrolling? How many hours are spent rehearsing conversations that never happen? The goal isn't to eliminate leisure, even monks sang and gardened, but to recognize when leisure becomes avoidance. Because the great irony is this: the more intentional you are with time, the more it expands. A king's day evaporated in trivialities. A monk's day held multitudes, not because he had more hours, but because he wasted fewer. The question isn't whether you're busy. It's whether you're alive in your busyness. Are your days a mosaic of intention or a blur of reaction? The answer doesn't require a grand gesture, just the courage to stop once today and ask, is this how I want to spend my one wild and precious life? The monks knew the clock was always ticking. Their power came from choosing again and again to listen. Routine was the invisible architecture of a monk's life, a scaffold of discipline that turned ordinary days into extraordinary transformation. While kings woke to the chaos of petitioners and emergencies, monks rose with the sun to a rhythm as precise as their breath. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, bridged both worlds. Before dawn, while Rome still slept, he'd light a lamp and write in his journal, grounding himself in Stoic principles before the weight of the crown descended. His words weren't grand proclamations, they were private reminders. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. This wasn't poetry, it was mental armor. By anchoring his day in reflection, he ensured his power came from purpose, not impulse. Compare this to King Francis I of France, whose mornings began with a parade of nobles vying for favor. His attention fractured before he'd even broken fast. His court was a theater of distraction, lavish hunts, impulsive wars, decisions made between goblets of wine. The difference wasn't just in their schedules, it was in their souls. One man used routine to sharpen his mind, the other let chaos dull his. modern neuroscience confirms what the monks knew. Predictable rituals reduce cognitive load, freeing mental energy for what matters. Think of Barack Obama wearing only blue or gray suits as president. "I'm trying to pare down decisions," he explained. Or Oprah Winfrey's decades-long morning meditation practice, a non-negotiable anchor amid the whirlwind of production deals and interviews. Structure, when chosen deliberately, isn't a cage, it's the trellis that lets greatness climb. The monks took this further. Their days weren't just organized, they were sacredly monotonous: prayer at the same hour, meals in silence, labor as meditation. This repetition wasn't mindless, it was mastery. Like a musician practicing scales, they understood that freedom emerges from constraint. A king's schedule might change with every courier's news. A monk's didn't waver even in plague or war. There's a lesson here for our era of endless notifications and burnout. When every moment is a battleground for your attention, routine becomes rebellion. So here's your challenge: steal one page from the monk's playbook this week. Not a drastic overhaul, just a single ritual. Maybe it's 5 minutes of journaling before you check your phone, like Marcus Aurelius with his lamp. Or a walk without headphones, letting your mind untangle like the monks pacing their cloisters. The goal isn't rigidity, it's reverence for your own focus. Because the truth is this: your days are already a routine. The question is whether it's one you've chosen or one the world has imposed. Kings lost themselves in the frenzy of reaction. Monks found themselves in the quiet of intention. Where will you stand? Emotional equilibrium wasn't just a practice for monks, it was their fortress. While kings raged at messengers bearing bad news or dissolved into panic when battles turned, monks faced hunger, isolation, and uncertainty with eerie steadiness. This wasn't suppression of feeling, but something far more nuanced: the Stoic art of separating event from interpretation. Epictetus, who endured slavery's whip before philosophy's pen, framed it perfectly. It's not what happens to you, but how you react that matters. Kings heard thunder and saw omens. Monks heard weather and adjusted their robes. History's most disastrous rulers reveal the cost of unchecked emotion. Ivan the Terrible flew into such violent rages that he accidentally killed his own heir during an argument. Contrast that with the monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who survived bombings in Vietnam while teaching his students to smile to the anger, not denying its heat, but refusing to be burned by it. The difference wasn't temperament, it was training. Stoics viewed emotions like weather patterns: observable, transient, and not personal. A king took a rival's insult as a cosmic challenge. A monk noted it as wind-rustling leaves, then returned to his breath. Modern neuroscience validates this ancient wisdom. When we react impulsively, the amygdala hijacks the prefrontal cortex, literally overriding rational thought. But studies on long-term meditators show thickened prefrontal areas, the brain's pause button. This isn't mysticism, it's muscle memory. Like a firefighter staying calm in flames because they've trained for it, monks conditioned their minds daily. Marcus Aurelius journaled reminders like, "The blazing fire makes flames and brightness out of everything thrown into it," not to deny hardship, but to alchemize it. So where does this leave us? Think of a recent moment when frustration hijacked you, maybe in traffic, or when a colleague took credit for your work. The flush of heat, the clenched jaw, the words you regretted. Now imagine the monk's response: a breath to create space, then a choice. Not "don't feel," but "feel fully, then act wisely." This is emotional equilibrium's superpower. It doesn't numb you to life's stings. It gives you the antidote before the poison spreads. Try this reframe next time emotion surges. Picture yourself as both the storm and the observer. The anger is real, but so is your ability to watch it pass like clouds over a mountain. Kings toppled because they mistook themselves for the storm. Monks endured because they knew they were the mountain. The myth of more is perhaps the most seductive trap of all, one that kings fell into century after century, while monks quietly cracked its code. Picture a medieval monarch standing atop his castle walls, gazing at lands stretching to the horizon, yet still scheming to annex his neighbor's fields. Now shift to a monk breaking his fast with a single bowl of barley gruel, savoring each bite as if it were a feast. Who was truly rich? Epictetus, the Stoic who traded slavery for wisdom, sliced through the illusion. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. Kings measured their worth by what filled their coffers. Monks measured theirs by what filled their souls. History's most notorious hoarders reveal the hollowness of this chase. King Midas starved amidst his golden touch. Emperor Nero gilded entire palaces while Rome burned. And modern billionaires build yachts so large they require smaller support yachts trailing behind. The pattern never changes. The hunger for more doesn't fade with acquisition, it grows. Contrast this with the monks of Mount Athos, who have lived for centuries in stone cells with just a wooden cup, a wool blanket, and a handwritten Bible. Their poverty, by royal standards, would seem unbearable. Yet visitors describe these men as radiant, their joy palpable. Why? Because they discovered the alchemy of enough. Modern materialism peddles a similar delusion to the one that ensnared kings. That happiness lies just beyond the next purchase. Advertisements whisper that you'll finally feel secure with a bigger home, accomplished with a faster car, loved with a newer gadget. But the math never adds up. Studies show lottery winners return to baseline happiness within a year, while the average American home has tripled in size since the 1950s alongside tripled rates of anxiety. The monks would nod knowingly. Their discipline wasn't about rejecting comfort, it was about refusing to let comfort define them. A king's feast left him bloated and craving tomorrow's banquet. A monk's simple meal left him light, grateful, and free. So here's the invitation: define your enough, not as deprivation but as liberation. Start with one area: your closet, your calendar, even your screen time. Ask, does this add value or just weight? The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, imagining losing what you have to rediscover its worth. Try it now. Picture your bank account halved. Would you miss the extra zero or the experiences it once bought? The monk's secret wasn't minimalism, it was intentionalism. Every possession, every commitment had to earn its place by serving purpose, not pride. The irony is this: kings died clutching treasures they couldn't take with them, while monks died with nothing, and yet left behind legacies that still breathe wisdom today. Your turn when the world shouts more, whisper back, for what? And in that pause, you might just hear the sound of your own freedom. Judgment without wisdom is like a sword without a hilt. It cuts the wielder as deeply as the target. Kings throughout history made snap decisions that echoed for generations. Henry VIII divorcing England from the Catholic Church in a fit of passion, or the Russian Tsar Paul I issuing erratic decrees so frequently that nobles finally smothered him with a pillow. Their crowns gave them the authority to act instantly, but not the discernment to act well. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, warned against this in his private writings. Our actions may be impeded, but there can be no impeding our intentions or dispositions. Because we can accommodate and adapt, the mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. Kings saw obstacles as threats to their authority. Monks saw them as tests of their wisdom. Consider the contrast in their decision-making rhythms. A king receiving news of rebellion would summon troops within hours, fueled by outrage. A monk, hearing criticism from a fellow brother, might spend days in silent contemplation before responding, not out of indecision, but from the Stoic practice of prosoch, vigilant self-awareness. One prioritized speed, the other prioritized alignment with principle. Modern neuroscience reveals why this matters. The brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoned judgment, takes milliseconds longer to engage than the amygdala's fight or flight reactions. Kings ruled from the amygdala. Monks trained the prefrontal cortex like a muscle. This isn't just ancient history. Think of a modern CEO approving a merger over a weekend to outpace competitors, only to discover hidden liabilities months later. Or a parent snapping at a child in frustration, then regretting the words as soon as they're spoken. Haste doesn't just increase errors, it erodes trust. Contrast that with leaders like Angela Merkel, nicknamed Mutti a mother for her deliberative style during crises. Her response to the 2015 refugee influx wasn't swift, but it was measured, weighing ethical imperatives against practical constraints. The monks would recognize her approach. Wisdom isn't the absence of action, but the presence of pause. So how do we cultivate this? Start with Marcus Aurelius' nightly ritual, reviewing the day's events like a scroll, asking not, "What did I achieve?" but "What did I learn?" Try it tonight. Recall a recent decision made in haste, maybe an angry email sent, an impulsive purchase, or a snap judgment about someone's motives. Now imagine the monk's alternative, breathing into the space between stimulus and response, asking 3 questions. Is this necessary? Is this kind? Is this true? That gap, however small, is where wisdom grows. The irony is profound. Kings had advisors, libraries, and messengers to inform their choices, yet so often chose poorly. Monks had only silence and their own minds, yet so often chose well. The difference wasn't in resources, but in rhythm. In a world that glorifies the quick fix, the real power move might be slowing down just enough to hear your own wisdom whisper. Freedom thrives within fences, a paradox the monks understood and kings feared. While rulers saw limits as threats to their authority, monks embraced them as the very framework of liberation. Take their vows: poverty, chastity, obedience. To a king, these would seem like chains. To a monk, they were keys releasing him from the endless chase for more wealth, more pleasure, more control. Seneca, the Stoic who navigated Nero's treacherous court, wrote of deliberately wearing rough tunics in winter and sleeping on hard beds. Set aside a certain number of days to be content with the scantiest food. Then, when you return to your usual habits, you'll find them luxurious by comparison. The lesson: self-imposed limits don't shrink life, they heighten it. History's most reckless rulers illustrate the cost of resisting boundaries. Emperor Caligula declared war on the sea, commanding soldiers to stab the waves, a literal rebellion against nature's limits. Contrast that with Saint Benedict, whose monastic rule transformed Western spirituality. His constraints, fixed prayer times, communal labor, silence during meals, weren't punishments. They were guardrails, freeing monks from decision fatigue and petty disputes so their energy could flow toward what mattered. Modern psychology confirms this ancient wisdom. Creativity blossoms within constraints. Twitter's original character limit forced clarity. Olympic rules push athletes beyond what unlimited training could achieve. Even children playing a game invent more joy when the rules are clear. Today's most effective leaders mirror this monkish wisdom. Elon Musk reportedly cycles the same 5 outfits to conserve mental bandwidth. Angela Merkel's famous small steps approach during crises, methodical, incremental, proved more transformative than grand gestures. Constraints become superpowers when chosen deliberately. The CEO who blocks focus hours on her calendar isn't restricting productivity. She's defending it from the tyranny of endless meetings. The artist who limits his palette doesn't stifle creativity, he deepens it. Here's your invitation. Identify one liberating constraint. Maybe it's turning off notifications after sunset, committing to 3 sentences of journaling daily, or setting a 10-minute limit on social media scrolling. Test it for a week, not as deprivation but as an experiment in focus. Notice how the boundary doesn't confine you, it clarifies what's essential. Like a riverbank guiding water's flow, the right limits don't hinder momentum, they create direction. Kings exhausted themselves raging against walls. Monks, by contrast, built their lives within them and found a freedom more expansive than any throne could offer. Death wasn't a specter to be feared in the monk's cell, it was the most honest advisor one could have. While kings built monuments to outlast time and commissioned portraits to immortalize their faces, monks sat with skulls on their desks, tracing their fingers over the hollow eye sockets as a daily reminder, you will die too. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who ruled the known world yet slept on a camp cot, wrote in his private journal, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." For the monks, this wasn't morbid, it was clarifying. Mortality's shadow didn't paralyze them, it sharpened them, like a whetstone against a blade. Compare this to kings like Qin Shi Huang, who sent expeditions to find the elixir of immortality as his empire crumbled, or modern CEOs who chase quarterly profits like they're racing against an infinite horizon. The denial of death distorts priorities. A ruler who believes he'll live forever hoards power, postpones hard choices, and fears legacy over integrity. But a monk who knows his days are numbered, he wastes no time on pretense. Every prayer, every act of kindness, every moment of silence becomes urgent, not because time is scarce, but because it's sacred. History's most transformative leaders shared this monkish clarity. Steve Jobs, after his cancer diagnosis, famously said, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life." Contrast that with leaders like Enron's Jeffrey Skilling, whose "greed is good" mantra assumed endless tomorrows until the house of cards collapsed. The difference isn't just in outcomes, it's in orientation. One group led as if death were peering over their shoulder, the other as if they were gods playing with monopoly money. So here's the challenge. Imagine you've just received a letter from your future self, stamped with a single word, soon, not a threat but a gift. What projects would you abandon? What conversations would you finally have? What petty grievances would you release like stones from your pockets? The monks didn't meditate on death to depress themselves, they did it to wake themselves up. Because when you stop pretending you're exempt from the human condition, every sunrise becomes a contract you're lucky to sign. This isn't about bucket lists or reckless abandon. It's about the quiet calibration that happens when you stop conflating busy with alive. Kings died clutching scepters, convinced they'd cheated the reaper until the last breath. Monks died with empty hands and full hearts, having lived as if each day were both their first and last. The question isn't whether death is coming, it's whether you'll let it teach you how to live before it does. Purpose burned in the monk's cell like a single flame, steady, unwavering, immune to the winds of distraction. While kings ricocheted from conquest to pleasure to legacy building, monks distilled their existence to one irreducible aim, the pursuit of virtue. Epictetus, the Stoic who turned his lamplit lectures into a survival manual for the soul, laid it bare. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. For monks, that what was non-negotiable. Every prayer, every moment of labor, every act of charity flowed from that fixed star. A king might change his decrees with the mood of his courtiers. A monk's compass pointed only north. Consider the contrast in their legacies. King Herod the Great built Masada's impregnable fortress and the Second Temple's grandeur, yet died in torment, his name synonymous with paranoia and infanticide. Meanwhile, Benedict of Nursia, with no army or treasury, founded a monastic rule so enduring it shaped Western civilization for 15 centuries. One man chased monuments, the other meaning and time revealed, which was truly unshakable. The difference wasn't in their power, but in their purpose. Herod's actions were reactions to threats, to insecurities, to the endless hunger for more. Benedict's were emanations from a core so solid that even the collapse of Rome couldn't fracture it. Modern leaders face the same fork in the road. A CEO might pivot strategies quarterly to please shareholders, while another, like Patagonia's Yvon Chouinard, builds an empire around environmental stewardship, even sacrificing profits to protect the planet. The former leads from external noise, the latter from internal clarity. The Stoics called this proherses, the act of aligning every choice with your deepest why. When your purpose is clear, decisions simplify. A monk asked, "Does this serve virtue?" A king asked, "Does this serve me?" The gap between those questions is the gap between lasting influence and fleeting power. Here's the practice Epictetus would urge. Take out a blank page right now and write your purpose in one sentence. Not a mission statement peppered with jargon, but something so essential it could guide you in a storm. Imagine it etched on your tombstone. Would it read like Herod's, "He built much and trusted nothing," or like Benedict's, "He loved deeply and served quietly"? This isn't about grandiosity, it's about gravity. When SpaceX's engineers face a seemingly impossible problem, they return to Musk's North Star: make life multiplanetary. That clarity cuts through complexity like a laser. So distill yours. Is it to create beauty, to alleviate suffering, to ignite curiosity? Whatever it is, let it be so vivid that when distractions arise, and they will, you can hear your monk's voice whisper, "Does this belong in the story you're writing with your life?" Kings lost themselves in the thicket of temporary winds. Monks, with nothing but their purpose, found paths through the wilderness that outlasted dynasties. Your turn. Distraction was the silent thief that plundered kings, while monks guarded their attention like sacred ground. Picture a medieval ruler besieged by courtiers whispering gossip, petitions piling unchecked, and messengers delivering half-truths, his days dissolving into reactive chaos. Now shift to the monastery, where every hour had intention. The bell for prayer wasn't an interruption, it was a return to center. Seneca, the Stoic who watched Rome's elite fritter away lives on trivialities, warned, "We are tight-fisted with money, yet reckless with time, the one thing it's right to be stingy with." Kings hoarded gold but squandered moments, mistaking motion for progress. Modern leaders face this same trap in digital disguise. The average executive spends 35 hours a week in meetings, many of which could be emails, while checking their phone 90 times daily. Like a king distracted by court theatrics, they end each day exhausted yet unfulfilled, having answered countless demands but advanced nothing meaningful. Contrast this with Warren Buffett's famous two-list strategy, writing down 25 priorities, circling 5, and avoiding the rest at all costs. That's the monk's approach in a boardroom, recognizing that focus isn't about saying yes to the right things, but no to everything else. The cost compounds invisibly. Research shows it takes 23 minutes to regain deep focus after an interruption. Imagine a king's scribe trying to draft a treaty while nobles barged in hourly. The document would be riddled with contradictions. Yet we treat our minds the same way, toggling between spreadsheets, Slack messages, and news alerts, then wondering why our decisions lack depth. Monks cultivated custodia oculi, custody of the eyes, a practice of directing attention deliberately. They knew distraction wasn't just lost time, it was lost self. Here's the challenge. For the next 3 days, eliminate one distraction that feels urgent but isn't. Maybe it's the morning news scroll that puts your mind in crisis mode before breakfast, or the habitual inbox check every 15 minutes that fractures your focus. Replace it with 5 minutes of intentional silence, no agenda, no output, just presence. You'll discover what the monks knew. When you stop feeding the chaos, clarity finds space to grow. Kings lost kingdoms to the tyranny of the trivial. Monks, with nothing but their attention intact, built wisdom that outlasted empires. Stillness wasn't emptiness for the monks, it was the fertile ground where insight took root. While kings raced from battlefield to banquet hall, their minds churning with plots and paranoia, monks sat motionless on stone floors, discovering a truth that eluded rulers for centuries. Clarity grows in quiet. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who governed an empire by day and scribbled Stoic wisdom by candlelight, captured this paradox. Nowhere can a man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. He didn't write this as poetry, but as strategy. The busiest leader of his time knew that stillness wasn't a luxury, it was the keystone of discernment. History's most reactive rulers reveal the cost of neglecting this practice. King Richard the Lionheart spent years campaigning abroad while his brother John schemed back home, leaving England in chaos. His relentless motion fighting battles, chasing glory, left no space to sense the fractures in his own kingdom. Contrast that with the monks of Mount Athos, who have preserved ancient manuscripts and spiritual traditions for over 1,000 years, not through action, but through attentive stillness. Their monasteries weren't just places of prayer, they were laboratories of perception, where hours of silence sharpened awareness to the subtlest shifts in the self, in others, in the world. Modern neuroscience confirms what these monks practiced. Studies on default mode network brain activity show that during restful states free from external stimuli, the mind consolidates memories, solves complex problems, and even sparks creative breakthroughs. Think of Archimedes shouting "Eureka" in his bath, or Newton formulating gravity while sitting under an apple tree. Stillness isn't passive. It's the incubator where fragmented ideas coalesce into genius. The kings who lost empires were often the ones who couldn't sit still long enough to hear their own intuition whispering warnings. So here's the challenge for today's leaders. Schedule thinking time as ruthlessly as you schedule meetings. Bill Gates famously took think weeks, retreating to a lakeside cabin with stacks of books and zero interruptions. A practice directly responsible for Microsoft's pivot to the internet in the 1990s. You don't need a cabin. Start with 5 minutes. Before checking your phone in the morning, sit by a window and watch the light change. Notice how your mind, untethered from inputs, begins to untangle knots you didn't even realize were there. The monks didn't meditate to escape the world, but to see it more clearly. Try this experiment today. Set a timer for 300 seconds, no agenda, no meditation app, just you and the rhythm of your breath. When distractions arise, and they will, imagine them as courtiers clamoring for a king's attention. You're not the king, you're the monk. Your only task is to observe without grabbing or pushing anything away. At first, it may feel like wasting time. That's the illusion shattering. These moments of stillness aren't gaps in your productivity. They're the loom weaving the threads of your insight. The kings who fell were the ones who mistook motion for progress. The monks who endured understood a quieter truth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing. Retreat wasn't retreating for the monks, it was advancing inward. While kings clung to their thrones, terrified that stepping away for even a day might unravel their grip on power, monks deliberately vanished into mountain caves or forest hermitages, not to escape their responsibilities, but to return to them renewed. Epictetus, the Stoic who turned his own hardships into a curriculum for resilience, put it bluntly: He who fears death either fears the loss of sensation or a different kind of sensation. But if you'll have no sensation, neither will you feel any harm. Replace death with rest, and the lesson becomes startlingly modern. We fear stepping away because we confuse stillness with surrender. Kings saw rest as weakness, monks saw it as strategy. History's most exhausted rulers prove the cost of this miscalculation. Take Frederick the Great of Prussia, who micromanaged his army to the point of insomnia, scribbling orders at 3 in the morning until his health and judgment frayed. Contrast that with the rhythm of Benedictine monks, whose rule mandated not just work and prayer, but regular, quiet days, periods of total silence where even necessary communication was done in gestures. The result, a spiritual and intellectual tradition that endured for 15 centuries, while Frederick's empire fractured within generations. The difference wasn't stamina, it was sustainability. One mistook constant motion for control. The other understood that true stewardship requires seasons of fallow ground. Modern burnout culture mirrors this divide. The executive boasting about sleepless nights, the entrepreneur glued to their phone on vacation, the student cramming until dawn, all are kings in denial, convinced their worth is measured in visible effort. Yet neuroscience confirms what monks practiced. Downtime isn't empty space, it's where consolidation happens. Studies on default mode network brain activity reveal that breakthroughs in creativity and problem solving occur not in the frenzy of focus, but in the shower, on a walk, or in the haze before sleep. The mind, like soil, yields its richest harvests when allowed to lie fallow. So here's your invitation: plan a mini retreat. Not a month in a monastery unless you can swing it, but an intentional pause. It could be as simple as a morning where you leave your phone in a drawer and sit with a notebook, or an afternoon wandering a park with no agenda beyond noticing the color of the leaves. The rules are simple: no productivity metrics, no shoulds, just space. Epictetus would approve. He didn't preach austerity for its own sake, but as a reset button for the soul. When you step back into your life, you'll carry something unexpected, not less urgency, but more clarity. Because the irony is this: kings who never retreated ruled in perpetual fog. Monks who retreated regularly saw further than any throne could offer. Patience wasn't passive waiting for the monks, it was active endurance, a deliberate choice to align with time rather than fight against it. Picture a king pacing his war room, demanding immediate victories, his advisors scrambling to deliver results before his temper flares. Now shift to a monk planting an olive tree, knowing he'll never taste its fruit, yet tending it with the same care as his daily bread. Seneca, the Stoic who counseled emperors, saw this divide clearly. Time heals what reason cannot. For kings, time was an enemy to conquer. For monks, it was an ally to respect. History's most reckless rulers reveal the cost of impatience. King Philip II of Spain, obsessed with crushing the Dutch revolt, bankrupted his empire financing endless armies, only to die with the rebellion still raging. Contrast that with the Benedictine monks who copied manuscripts letter by letter, century after century, preserving Western thought through the Dark Ages. Their work wasn't glamorous or fast, it was glacial. Yet today we remember the monks' patience, not Philip's haste. The difference: one group confused speed with progress, the other understood that some things, trust, wisdom, legacy, can't be rushed. Modern leadership often mirrors this ancient tension. The CEO pushing for quarterly growth at the expense of employee well-being, the politician trading long-term stability for short-term popularity. These are kings in suits, sacrificing tomorrow for today. Meanwhile, figures like Warren Buffett, who famously said his favorite holding period is forever, embody the monk's mindset. His wealth wasn't built on flashy trades, but on the quiet discipline of letting compounding work its magic. The Stoics would nod in recognition. Patience, they taught, isn't inaction, it's action stripped of frenzy. Here's the pivot point. Patience isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing what matters without demanding instant validation. Think of a gardener planting sequoia seeds, or a scientist spending decades on research that might fail. Their patience isn't passive, it's a relentless focus on the process, detached from the hunger for applause. That's the monk's secret. When you stop measuring success in days, you start building something that lasts for generations. So try this today. Choose one area where you've been rushing, maybe a skill you're learning, a relationship you're mending, or a project you're forcing. Now ask, what if I gave this the time it truly needs? Not with resignation, but with the monk's quiet certainty that some fruits ripen only when we stop shaking the tree. Kings demanded orchards by morning. Monks tended saplings for lifetimes. Which harvest do you want to taste? Isolation didn't mean indifference for the monk. It meant focusing their energy with surgical precision. While kings hoarded wealth and demanded tribute from subjects, monks in their mountain cells practiced something radical: service without strings. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who penned private meditations on duty amid the chaos of ruling, wrote, "What benefits the hive benefits the bee." For monks, solitude wasn't an escape from community, but a way to purify their capacity to serve it. They copied manuscripts not for fame, but to preserve wisdom for future generations. They distilled herbs not for profit, but to heal travelers who stumbled upon their doors. Their isolation was a refining fire, burning away ego until only compassion remained. Contrast this with kings who treated their people as extensions of their power. Louis XIV's elate at c'est moi, "I am the state," wasn't just a boast, it was a worldview. Subjects were taxed into poverty to fund Versailles' gilded halls, their suffering invisible behind palace gates. The monks, though physically distant, held a mirror to this hypocrisy. Benedict of Nursia's rule commanded monks to welcome every stranger as Christ, to share their last loaf with beggars. Their service wasn't transactional, it was gravitational, a natural outpouring of their inner alignment. Modern leaders often oscillate between these extremes, either drowning in meetings until they lose touch with their own values, or retreating into self-care that borders on self-absorption. The Stoic balance, solitude that fuels service. Think of Florence Nightingale, who spent years studying statistics in seclusion before revolutionizing nursing, or Nelson Mandela, whose prison solitude forged the patience to lead a fractured nation. Their retreats weren't escapes, they were incubators for greater giving. Here's where it lands for you today. Perform one act of service that costs you something but demands no recognition. Carry a neighbor's groceries without posting about it. Leave a heartfelt note in a library book for a stranger to find. The monks didn't wait for grand stages to matter. They turned every moment into an altar of connection. Because leadership isn't about the spotlight you command, it's about the light you carry into the dark corners others ignore. Gratitude wasn't just a feeling for the monks, it was a discipline, sharpened daily like a blade. While kings dined on silver platters without tasting their food, monks savored plain bread as if it were a feast, turning every meal into a ritual of thankfulness. Epictetus, the Stoic who knew poverty before wisdom, laid bare the paradox. He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has. Kings amassed treasures yet starved for joy. Monks owned nothing yet overflowed with it. The difference wasn't in their possessions, but in their perception. Consider the court of Louis XV, where nobles gorged on 60-course banquets while peasants starved outside Versailles' gates. The king's excess didn't breed gratitude, it bred numbness, each luxury dulling his capacity to appreciate the next. Meanwhile, in a Tibetan monastery, a monk might spend hours crafting a single mandala from colored sand, only to sweep it away upon completion. The act wasn't futile, it was a masterclass in cherishing the transient. Kings clung to their gold, monks found gold in the fleeting, the scent of rain, the warmth of a shared silence, the miracle of breath. Modern research echoes this ancient wisdom. Studies on gratitude journals show participants report 25% higher happiness levels after just 3 weeks of practice. But here's the twist. It's not about listing generic blessings like family or health. The monks drilled deeper. They thanked the itch on their nose that taught patience, the frostbite that tested resilience, even the critic who revealed their pride. Their gratitude wasn't passive, it was alchemical, transforming hardship into curriculum. Contrast this with leaders who mistake privilege for entitlement. A CEO berating staff over a delayed private jet embodies the king's mind set blind to the marvel of flight itself. Meanwhile, figures like Abraham Lincoln, who penned thank-you notes to rank and file soldiers during the Civil War, understood what the monks practiced. Gratitude isn't just manners, it's magnetism. Teams rally behind leaders who notice their sweat. Movements grow when people feel seen. Here's your invitation. Start a gratitude journal with a monk's precision. Not just, I'm thankful for my job, but I'm thankful for the colleague who double-checked my report yesterday. Not, I'm grateful for my home, but I'm grateful for the way sunlight pools on the kitchen floor at 3 p.m. Epictetus would urge you to go further. Thank the traffic jam that taught you patience, the broken appliance that revealed your privilege, even the fear that keeps you alert. This isn't toxic positivity, it's tactical reframing, because gratitude at its core is rebellion against the human brain's negativity bias, against a culture screaming, more. Against the lie that joy lies only in the next achievement. The monks didn't wait for abundance to be thankful, they found abundance by being thankful. And that's the final irony. Kings died clutching riches they'd never truly possessed, while monks died rich in moments they'd fully owned. Your turn. Pick up the pen. The kingdom you'll build isn't on any map. It's in the space between I have and enough. Change was the crucible where kings rusted and monks refined themselves. Seneca, the Stoic who navigated Nero's court without losing his soul, wrote, "The wise man changes his mind, the fool never does." For monks, transformation wasn't a threat, it was the heartbeat of growth. They woke each morning not as the same men who'd gone to sleep, but as students of their own flaws, ready to shed old skins like serpents, kings though. They armored themselves in tradition, mistaking rigidity for strength. Their crowns became crowns of thorns, piercing them with every shift in the wind they refused to acknowledge. Look at history's turning points. When the bubonic plague ravaged Europe, monks adapted, turning monasteries into hospitals, scribing medical texts, even pioneering quarantine practices. Meanwhile, King Philip VI of France declared the plague a punishment from God, refusing to alter court rituals until his own wife succumbed. One group saw crisis as a call to evolve, the other as a reason to dig in deeper. The irony, the monks' flexibility saved lives, the king's stubbornness cost them. Modern leadership mirrors this divide. Blockbuster clung to DVD rentals while Netflix pivoted to streaming. Kodak invented the digital camera but buried it to protect film. These weren't failures of vision, they were failures of courage. The Stoics knew, wisdom isn't knowing everything, it's being willing to unlearn anything. A monk would rather admit he was wrong yesterday than stay wrong today. A king would sooner burn the evidence than bend his knee to reality. So where does this leave you? Think of one habit, just one that's outlived its usefulness. Maybe it's the way you dismiss new ideas with, "That's not how we do things," or the reflexive defensiveness when someone offers feedback. Now imagine approaching it like a monk, not as a flaw to defend, but as a knot to untie. Seneca would urge you to ask, does this habit serve my growth or just my comfort? Because the real test of leadership isn't how firmly you stand your ground, it's how gracefully you pivot when the ground shifts beneath you. The invitation isn't to change everything overnight. It's to start where the monks did, with the humility to recognize that even the wisest among us are works in progress. So name that habit aloud if you dare, and take the first step. Not as a king clutching his scepter, but as a monk kneeling in the dirt, planting seeds for a self he hasn't met yet. Monuments crumble, but wisdom echoes across centuries. Consider the ruins of ancient palaces: Persepolis, Babylon, Versailles, their once gilded halls now silent, their builders' names kept alive only by historians. Then turn to the teachings of Marcus Aurelius, scribbled by candlelight in a military tent, still shaping lives 2,000 years later. He grasped a truth most kings never did. What survives of us is not what we build in stone, but what we etch in human minds. The monks understood this instinctively. While kings poured treasure into pyramids and triumphal arches, monks invested in something far more enduring: ideas. They copied manuscripts until their fingers cramped, not for wealth or fame, but because they knew words outlast empires. A king's statue might stand for 100 years. A single line of Stoic philosophy could redirect a life millennia later. Take Charlemagne, the emperor who united Europe by sword. His empire fractured within generations of his death, his capital now a footnote in guidebooks. Yet the anonymous monks of his era, painstakingly preserving Aristotle and Cicero in candlelit scriptoria, became the invisible bridge between antiquity and the Renaissance. Their legacy, the very fabric of modern thought. This isn't about piety, it's about perspective. Kings measured influence in territory controlled. Monks measured it in minds awakened. The irony is stark. Those who sought immortality through conquest were often forgotten, while those who served something larger than themselves became timeless. Modern leaders face the same choice. A CEO fixated on quarterly earnings might spike the stock price briefly, but the one who mentors employees or champions ethical practices plants seeds that grow for decades. Think of Ray Dalio's Principles versus the splashy headlines of a disgraced executive. One fuels careers long after its author retires. The other becomes a cautionary tale. Legacy isn't about scale, it's about substance. The monk who taught a single child to read might have sparked generations of literacy. The king who built 1,000 shrines might have left only dust. So here's the question to carry forward. When your name is spoken years from now, what will it evoke? Not the titles you held or the wealth you amassed, but the imprint you left on hearts and minds. Marcus Aurelius didn't beg Rome to remember him. He wrote privately, honestly, and in doing so became unforgettable. The monks didn't chisel their names into abbey walls. They wove themselves into the collective memory of humanity through service. Your legacy won't be measured in monuments, but in moments: the encouragement you gave, the truth you spoke, the quiet example you set when no one was watching. That's how influence outlasts empires. That's how even the humblest life can ripple through eternity. The greatest leaders in history weren't always the ones who wore crowns or commanded armies. Sometimes they were the ones who wore simple robes and commanded only their own attention. Look at the contrast: kings drowning in the noise of courts and conquests, their legacies often stained with blood and excess. monks sitting in silent cells, their influence rippling outward not through force, but through the quiet power of self-mastery. The Stoics knew this truth long before modern leadership gurus. Real authority doesn't come from controlling others, it comes from mastering yourself. A king might rule a kingdom but be enslaved by his own temper, his cravings, his fear of losing power. A monk with nothing but a bowl and a book could be freer than any emperor, because his sovereignty was internal, unshakable, and immune to the whims of fortune. Think of the lessons etched into this divide. Presence, the monk's ability to sit with discomfort, to listen to silence, to meet each moment without the distraction of past regrets or future anxieties. Virtue, the choice to act with integrity even when no one was watching, to align actions with principles rather than applause. And perhaps most strikingly, the paradox of isolation. While kings surrounded themselves with sycophants yet died lonely, monks who chose solitude discovered a deeper connection to humanity. Their isolation wasn't withdrawal, it was refinement. Like a blade tempered in fire, their clarity was honed in stillness, sharp enough to cut through the illusions that trapped kings in cycles of paranoia and excess. The Stoics would argue that this isn't just ancient history, it's a mirror. Modern leadership, whether in boardrooms or classrooms, still grapples with the same choice: rule through fear or lead through example. The CEO who demands loyalty but lacks self-discipline, the politician who chases polls instead of principles. They're the new age kings, mistaking influence for wisdom. Meanwhile, the teacher who cultivates patience, the parent who models resilience, the mentor who listens more than they speak, they're the heirs to the monks, proving that leadership isn't about the title, but the texture of your character. Epictetus, the Stoic who turned hardship into philosophy, put it plainly: no man is free who is not master of himself. That's the invitation here, not to abandon ambition, but to anchor it in something sturdier than external validation. Start small. Choose one lesson from the Stoics. Maybe it's pausing before reacting, or letting go of an outcome you can't control, or simply sitting with silence for 5 minutes today. Leadership begins the moment you stop asking, "How can I change the world?" and start asking, "How can I change my response to it?" So now we turn to you. Which Stoic principle resonated most? Was it the monk's detachment, the emperor's journaling, or the quiet power of presence? Drop a comment below, not just to share, but to solidify the lesson in your own mind. Because here's the secret the monks knew: wisdom isn't just learned, it's lived. And the best leaders aren't the ones on stages shouting answers, but the ones in the crowd asking better questions. Your throne isn't out there waiting to be claimed. It's already within you, built one disciplined thought, one intentional action, one quiet moment at